Don't look at me during this lecture. Honestly, get your Bible out and be looking at that. This particular session is full. It's chapters 17 and 18, very important in the whole scheme of Revelation, probably the second most important part. And that's why I'm doing 17 again, but briefly. There are identities there that we need to know if we're ever going to teach this or talk about it. At least talk about it in the effect that it has already happened. Or take a nap if you want, that's all right. Just the very fact that you logged in adds to the whole effect here. I had one that came on just a minute ago. I think I know who it was, and they left, I guess. When they heard that music, they didn't want to be around here anymore. Anyway, chapter 17, we'll just get right started. And that is the beginning of the plagues of the 7 bowls. Verse 1, and one of the 7 messengers of those having the 7 bowls came out and spoke with me, saying, come here, I'll show you the sentence of the Megawhore, the one who's seated on many waters, with whom the sovereigns of the earth engaged in illicit sex acts. Illicit, that means forbidden by law, or in this case by the Torah, or by the rules of morality, or by the customs of the state, illicit sex acts. Porneusen. Porneusen. You hear the word porn in there. You're going to see that a lot of times in this particular chapter. And the one who has intoxicated the world's inhabitants from the wine of her licentiousness. Behavior that is sexual, uncontrolled, could be illegal or immoral. But for one thing for sure, it's socially and spiritually unacceptable. That is licentiousness. You can hear that word license in there. You're not licensed to do these things. Yet, isn't this not true? That the great Megawhore has intoxicated not only the kings of the world, but the people all over the place of the world, lawless people, godless people, to do things that are disgusting in many cases, disgusting, abominations. So look, everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. I'm not doing it. I want what is coming to me in chapter 20 and 21, don't you? Of course. Now this Megawhore, mega means great. The Megawhore is defined then later as the city of Jerusalem, which you already knew, though you would take it for the city of Rome because of the way it's described through the rest of the chapter. Well, it could just as well refer to Rome if it wasn't for the fact that Revelation defines who stands for the Megawhore. However, the text that we're reading isn't about Italy. It's not about Europe. It's about Palestina. Sex acts had a double meaning. It's literal and also speaks of spiritual idolatry or spiritual or moral degradation. That is the wine of licentiousness. Behavior that is sexual, uncontrolled, socially unacceptable, the carrier of disfiguring diseases. It can also mean a lack of legal or moral restraints or a disregard for strict rules of correctness. Licentiousness, again, porneus. It's a noun that means a lack of legal or moral restraints. Okay. 3, you have a question or a comment, please just break in. And the messenger carried me into the desert in a spirit wind. Every time the text says spirit here, I've got to put in spirit wind because sometimes it refers to a wind and sometimes it refers to a spirit, but the traditionally translated always have it as a spirit. Now, would a spirit be carrying this man into the desert, or would a wind? It's more feasible that a wind would, but there's no reason to think it's not a spirit wind. The wind, if you've ever been in a hurricane or been in a tornado, you know the wind can take you all over the place. And it continues that Yochanan, I saw a woman seated on a bright red beast, therion, a beast, an animal, or a wild man, as many times is translated, having 7 heads and 10 horns, full of blasphemous names. And the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet. You know, purple signifies royalty, and bright red signifies blood and death. In ancient times, the dyes for both of these colors were very expensive and rare, and only seen in the clothing of the rich. But the Roman Catholic Church in particular still uses purple for bishops, overseers, and red for the superior order of cardinals, which are senior clergy. Still use the same Roman colors, and I guess that's what I call it, the Roman Catholic Church. Now, this dressing of the woman is gilded with gold, precious rocks, and pearls. Here's something interesting for you. If you ever go to an Italian restaurant or probably a Mexican restaurant and order a margarita, that's the word for pearls, margaritas. I saw that and I thought that's pretty cool. When you think about later on in the chapter, we are told to fix this Megawhore a drink in her own cup and make it a double margarita. She's got a gold cup in her hand full of foulness and filth, uncleanliness of her illicit sex acts. And again, there's that word, porneia. Verse 5, and on her forehead or front, actually that word can mean either front or forehead, a name was written. And here's the name or title, Mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of the whores and the abominations of the earth. And that's usually written out in capital letters because in the early texts, it's in capital letters already. So abominations is a word that I've always had trouble with. What is an abomination? Abomination is something that's regarded with hatred or disgust, like a pig or like a snail. You wouldn't eat it. Or it's something considered to be hateful, sinful, wicked, or vile. For example, here's an action, cruelty to animals. Most wars would be abominations. Certainly, our human trafficking of today is an abomination. And Leviticus 11 tells you that you are an abomination if you eat illegal things. It's like Peter said in Acts, I don't know about chapter 10. He said, oh, no, Master, you know that I've never eaten anything common or unclean. That's what he's talking about, abominable things. Synonyms are hated things, depraved things, corrupt things, illegal and despised. And now we all know what it means to be an abomination or abominable, like the abominable snowman. Verse 6, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the Kadoshim. I use that word Kadoshim, it means set apart ones, because behind that is simply the word translated in English as holy, holy ones. This is talking about, in the context of the Revelation, that 144,000 you find the first half of Revelation 7. I haven't decided yet. I don't want to call them saints because that's certainly not a biblical word except in translation. And I don't know what to call them yet. People, for some reason, don't like the word holy or even hallowed. They don't like that word. Hebrew roots people, they don't like that word. So when I speak with them and I say that these are kadoshim, they said, what's that? What's that? Well, that's one of the most needed words if you're going to speak a little transliterated Hebrew. Kadosh, and I am at the end. By the way, that I am is pronounced im, not im. Im, kadoshim. Anytime you see an I am, that is an E sound. So these kadoshim, im meaning ones, plural. They are holy, set apart people. And quite possibly they're talking specifically here of the Revelation 7 virgins. Continuing, she's drunken with the blood of the Kadoshim, that's our kind, and with that of the witnesses of Yeshua. So this woman is a drinker of blood, a vampire, but she only likes the blood of good people. Let the rest go. And having seen her, Yochanan says, I was astonished with a great astonishment. And the messenger said to me, why are you so astonished? I'll tell you a mystery of the woman. Mystery, secret. Oftentimes in this kind of literature, mystery is talking about a religion. Lots and lots of religions at this time, just like today. Lots of offshoots of other religions. A lot of denominations of religions. We saw earlier on that in Ephesus, there were 500 assemblies there. And when I read about that, I thought, are these all Nazarene or Christian assemblies, or are they all different kinds? Well, I bet there was a lot of competition if they were all Nazarene or all Jewish type congregations. So here is a mystery, a religion of the woman and of the beast, both of them, the one carrying her that has the 7 heads and 10 horns. Regarding the beast that you saw, that was, and now isn't, and is, it's a mockery of the immortal one, about to rise up again out of the abyss and go into destruction. Do you remember Apollyon coming up out of the abyss? All right, they're going to end up in destruction. Interesting thing that comes to me that the 8th head here is especially set out for destruction. And you know who that is, but we'll go over it again in a minute. For those residing on land, those whose names aren't written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, in seeing the beast that was and isn't and will be, they'll admire it. Good translation, I think. So we go on to the identities of the 7 hills, 7 heads. John is trying to identify who is behind these characters that he's using, personified fictional characters. So in verse 9, here's a little riddle for you. Here's the mind of one having wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills upon which the woman is seated. A hill, some translations say mountains, but ore, the word ore can mean hills or mounds or mountains or just slightly elevated places. There are 7 hills in both Rome and Jerusalem, so we're not getting the straight dope yet. The 7 hills of Rome are Aventine, Caelian, Capitoline, Esquiline, Palatine, Quirino, and Viminal. Now, let's see. I believe, yeah, I'm just going to put these up here. If I can find them, where did they go? Oh, here they are. Let me show you in case you might want to take a note of that. You that are watching this on YouTube, to 7 heads. Aventine, Caelian, Capitoline, Esquiline, Palatine, Quirino, Viminal. The Vatican is not on any of these hills, strangely enough. Hold just a sec.
Can I say something? I just want to share a thought.
Please, just bust in.
I used to think that was the Vatican, but I realize now that I realize all this happened already. The Vatican wasn't built until like the early 1900s, so it wasn't even around when uh, when this was being talked about. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, there was a section called Vatican, but no, it wasn't built up at all. This was the doings of the Catholic Church putting something on top of something on top of something there. So yes, you're right. I could almost call the name of the Pope that put all that together in about 1911. So yes, absolutely right. No, it hasn't been there except as the name of a place since the time of the apostles. But the 7 hills of Jerusalem are probably more familiar to you if you read the scripture. Scopus, Olivet, Mount Corruption, I hadn't heard of that one. Mount Ophel, the original Zion, or Zion, correctly pronounced, the new Zion, and the Antonia Fortress Hill. They're really not sure where that Antonia Fortress was. They're finding these days that the traditional place of the Antonia Fortress, which fell down of its own during the Jewish war, is not it. So there are now several different places they're thinking that the Antonia Fortress was made, named after Mark Antony, the great general and enemy of Julius Caesar. Now, we might as well go into the 7 heads because the heads are also these guys, if we look at this from a historical perspective. Julius Caesar, or that's pronounced Caesar. I don't know how they get Caesar out of that. 46 to 44 BC, we're going back a long time. Second is his nephew, Octavian, whom they call Augustus, because he was supposedly a pretty good guy. I've read a lot of Augustus, and it seems that he was, but there's also Suetonius' account of Augustus' life that talks about all the little dirty things that he did behind the scenes, but never let them be known. Finally, when he was in his late 70s, his wife, Livia, well, you know what she did. The third is Tiberius, a terrible man, a porneia man, 14 AD to 37 AD. We'd wish to have him cut off much sooner because, as you know, he was into porneia big time, but with children, even infants. The fourth was Gaius, Caligula. If Tiberius would have been cut off a little earlier, Gaius, Caligula would have been too young to serve. But he comes in as a very young man in 37, same year Josephus was born, to 41, a short time. And as you recall, he was murdered by his friends in the arena. There was no Colosseum at that time. He was going out of the arena through the underground caves with his gang of friends, and all of a sudden the party stopped, and they all took out daggers and daggered him to death. Then, when he was laying there on the ground, they went and did the same thing to his wives, and children. So they're all gone. He was so much hated, and he was so perverted. Sometimes get out the lives of the Caesars. It's gossip about these emperors by Suetonius. It's online, it's free, it's very entertaining. Number 5 was Caligula's uncle, is that right? Caligula's uncle, that's right. He was an older man. He's the one that expelled the Jews from Rome. He served 41 to 54. He was married to Messalina, who we'll talk about again in a minute. And then after he had her executed, he married Agrippina the Younger, which we'll talk a little less about later. And Claudius was the one whose wife, Agrippina, the mother of Nero, poisoned him with a mushroom. 6th, this is Agrippina's son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, which means red beard. He called himself Nero. That's all he would be called. He reigned 54 to 68. And fortunately, he did away with his mother. He had incestuous relationships with his mother. He had his first wife, Claudius's daughter, murdered. He had his second wife kicked to death, and she was with child, and that was Poppaea Sabinus. I've got a picture of her here someplace. And Nero did, of course, marry 2 other people. One was a boy, Sporus, and the other was a gladiator, an ugly one at that, and I can't remember his name right now. So Nero was a pervert. His favorite practice in his time was to dress up in a costume, like having the legs of a bear, just like it's spoken of in Daniel, mixed animal costume, and going out and mugging people in the streets of Rome. Imagine a president doing that. Okay, next. Yochanan takes a little leeway here because there were 3 usurpers when Nero either disappeared or killed or committed suicide. 3 usurpers came in 1 year, the course of 1 year. It was the year of 4 emperors that you might have heard from. These guys were all no good, but I'll skip that because I talked about that before. And another one, notably skipped, is Vespasian, who conquered Galilee. Why would he be skipped? I can see why these guys would be skipped, because probably Yochanan never even knew they were there. Remember it taking 6 weeks for mail to get from Rome to Ephesus, or certainly to Patmos. So there's a big possibility that Yochanan knew nothing about these guys. I can see why there he might not have, but why not this guy? He was the one that conquered Galilee. He was well known and became emperor then after the civil war that happened in Rome in 69 AD. Number 7, though, is certainly Titus. The scripture says he only was there for a little while. Titus was the general who conquered Jerusalem. Brutally, he seems like from Josephus' account to be a very moral and religious person. However, he had to get in the walls of Jerusalem, and he used everything he could think of to get in there, and finally came upon a good plan. And Titus was only there a year and a half, 79 to 81 AD. Then came his brother that had nothing to do with the Jewish war. He is described, when we get back to the scripture again, as belonging to the 7th and going to destruction. He's also described in Christian literature of the time as the second Nero, or Nero redivivus, coming back to life. Domitian was from 81 to 96. And you remember in 96, he did go to destruction. He was in a Christian plot, actually, or I might say a Nazarene Judaism plot to be done with him. He was stabbed to death himself with his own dagger by Clement's wife's servant, Stephanus. Wow, is that ever convoluted? Along with several other famous believers. So these early emperors were in for 142 years. Let me go back now.
Wasn't Domitian his name? Wasn't he, didn't he have Nero in his name, like Domitian Nero or Nero Domitian?
Right here, Domitius. Yes.
Okay.
So that's why some of these church fathers, so-called, think that the Revelation was written in the time of Domitius, but they don't really think that. They're just confused. They're just confused. They're calling Nero by his formal name. He was known as Domitius until he told the people that he didn't want to be called that anymore, but Nero. So Domitius and Domitian, it's just that some of these people reading today don't know the history, don't know that Domitius is who these church fathers are talking about, and not Domitian. So they're thinking that the Revelation was written somewhere around 96, almost 30 years too late. And that's why people that we know that stand on the ground that Revelation was not a prophecy, or stand on the ground that Revelation is for the future, they stand there because they'll say, the church fathers say this was written during the reign of Domitian, which, it was written during the reign of Domitius. But you can see that kind of an error. But you point it out to them and might as well forget it because they don't want to know. Get back to my notes here, okay? They don't want to know. Back to the scripture. I'll tell you the mystery of the woman. I think we did that. And of the beast, the one carrying her, that has 7 heads and 10 horns. Regarding the beast that you saw that was and now isn't, and is about to rise again out of the abyss and go into destruction, those residing on land, those whose names aren't written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, in seeing the beast that was and isn't and will be. Why would it be that he isn't and then will be? Well, first of all, this is the takeoff on the Alpha and Omega, the one who is, who was, who is, and is to come. But this particular head of the beast, the sixth head, as you well know, was there, and then he was killed, according to Revelation 13, by a mortal wound, a head wound, and he rises from the dead. That's Nero. He killed himself with the help of Epaphroditus by stabbing himself with his help in the neck, in the head. And then he came in actually four different incarnations. Nero came back. The final one being the spiritual one, that was Domitian, the second Nero. And it says the people who are lost, they'll admire it. True, true, true. It's like, I won't say it, but there's a contemporary, well, I am going to say it. People admire the man who loved his son so much that he cries about the fact that he might be going to prison someday. And you know what head that is. Number 9, there's the mind of the one having wisdom. And we already went through this again, but this is there's a very difficult riddle coming up here. There are also 7 sovereigns, actually 8. The 5 are fallen, the one is. The ones fallen, as you know, are all up until Nero. The one who is Nero. The other hasn't come, it says. He's not saying that the 7th will be in order like the 6 before were, because the next one is not in order. It's in chronological order, but there were 4 other guys in there in between. And one of them, Vespasian, was in there for 10 years. Historically, there's about a decade between the 6th and the 7th. Let's see, we said Nero was out in 68, and the next one is the 7th, and that's Titus. He came in a decade or so later, so there's that time period that's not mentioned here. Historically, in that little time, 10 years, as I mentioned, there are 3 usurpers and then a 4th who is not mentioned. I don't want to talk about that. I already did. But the 7th and the 8th are both sons of Vespasian, the guy in 10 years, the guy that destroyed Galilee. He was then declared emperor right in the middle of the war, and he came back to Rome to take his place there and bring Rome back to a peaceful situation, leaving the 7th, Titus, Flavius Titus, or the guy with the double name, Titus Flavius Titus, the 7th head, succeeded him on the battlefield, and he was able to destroy Jerusalem, come back, take over for his father, who passed away in the meantime, but he only lasted a year and a half before that younger brother, Domitian, murdered him and became emperor. There aren't many things worse than murdering your brother, no matter how you don't like him. Domitian was always, always, always envious of his brother because his brother was a war hero. And Domitian was just too young, too frail to go out there. Domitian then is the 8th, belonging to the 7th. Nero resurrected and taking up that Neronic persecution, the Great Tribulation against believers. And when he'll come, verse 10, it behooves him to remain but a while. That's Titus. And the beast that was and isn't is also himself an eighth. This is the omission. He's out of the seven, brother of, and into destruction he's going. But it certainly takes a mind of wisdom to figure out how he, Domitian, and the beast Nero have something mysterious in common. There's a mathematical riddle. Do you know what it means when I say you factorialize a number? Okay, to factorialize a number,
Yes.
you do. Good. I'll explain it in case somebody doesn't know. You take a number like 8, might as well use that because this is the 8th head, and you add up all the numbers in that series from 1 to 8. Then you take that number, which in this case is 36, and add up all the numbers in that series and put it all together, and you get 666. A cute little trick. Nobody today really would think of that. I had a very hard time finding it. And I think I've left a little of the scripture out here because it talks about the wisdom that it takes to come up with how 8 and 666, how they have something in common. And that's how they do. These guys that wrote about revelations and prophecies and mysteries had all kinds of mathematical riddles. So it's a wonder that Yochanan knew about that. Also, instead of having to add up all those numbers, there are some what do you call it? Recipes. That's not it. Recipes for coming up with that. It's not an equation, is it? Yeah, an equation. For instance, for 8 divided by 2 times 1 plus 8 minus 4 times 9. You know the order of operations there, if you'd ever want to do it, equals 36. And you do the same thing with the 36. Cool, cool, cool. Come up with 666. And he's out of the 7, and into destruction he's going. And the 10 horns you saw are 10 sovereigns who haven't yet received sovereignty, but they receive authority as sovereigns with the beast for 1 hour. Very short time. These guys aren't named, but we need not consider that their 1 hour reigns are all in the same hour. Milton Terry says, it's not necessary to attempt a precise definition of these 10 subject kings, sovereigns. The symbol simply represents the totality of those allied or subject kings who aided Rome in her wars, both on Judaism and war on Christianity. So he doesn't mention them because I don't think he wants you to know them. 13, these have one reason to exist, to give their power and authority to the beast. Well, some have said it's the 10 provinces of Rome. That certainly could be. Jack Van Impe always said it's the European common market that goes from 10, then it goes up to 13, then it comes back down again. How many times did he say that when the common market wasn't 10 anymore? Well, yeah, it went up to 13, but sometimes it's going to come down to 10 again. All right. 14, these will war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will beat them, because he's master of masters and sovereign of sovereigns. There's a little mathematical riddle here too. Master of masters, sovereign of sovereigns, or as the traditional translators have it, King of kings and Lord of lords. If you add those letters up in Hebrew, no vowels, in that gematria, that comes to 777. Yochanan doesn't mention this. He leaves it for somebody to figure out. So we've got a 666 and a 777. Three numbers is a number of a man, as you know. You got three numerals, that's the number of a man. And what the number is tells you what kind of man it is. So we've got, in this perfection of three numbers, we have the master of masters and sovereign of sovereigns. And I expect they're talking about Yeshua HaMashiach. And the ones with him are called and elect and trusting. Is that you? Is that us? The ones with the sovereign of sovereign are called. They can't just come in the door. They can't come in unless they are called. You have a calling on your life. You know that you do. If you don't know that you do, then you've got some work to be done. And the elect, you have been chosen since, as it says before, the foundation of the world. We don't know how that works. It's certainly, we can't say that everything's predestinated because of that. And thirdly, those aren't enough to walk with the master in the glory of kingship, of sovereignty. The third is trusting. Now, you probably in your Bible have three completely different things there, but I'm really interested in what's really there. And that's why some of my words are different than your words. And he tells me, the messenger, the waters you saw, where the Megawhore is seated, are peoples and crowds and cultures and languages. And this is a very good explanation for whenever you see waters in prophetic words. Waters, you're thinking of storms on the sea. You're thinking of drowning or falling out of a boat. You can't stand in there alone unless you can walk on the water. 16, and the 10 horns that you saw, also the beast, these will despise the whore. You will think that they love the whore, but they don't. They'll denude and make waste of her, and they'll eat her flesh and burn her in fire. For into their hearts the Elohim's given it to do his purpose, and to do a single purpose, to give their sovereignties to the beast till the words of Elohim have reached their goal. That goal is the prophetic day of Yahweh. And the woman you saw is that megapolis, great city, the one having sovereignty over the sovereigns of the earth. Well, not politically, but certainly in accordance with this prophecy, this great city, being Jerusalem, as the text has previously described, might not rule them politically, but certainly it rules them. It rules them spiritually, no doubt about that. Spiritual power, bad spiritual power. Though it's Jerusalem, it could also be Rome. As we looked at, there's 7 hills. I don't know about you, but I grew up in an atmosphere with a Bible teacher who lived in our house, who believed very strongly that the Roman Catholic Church is the Megawhore spoken of in Revelation 17. And that very question was asked on Quora. Quora is a good site to get your questions answered on any topic. I'm involved in it at times. I do Bible questions there. Revelation 17:18 identifies the woman. It says she's the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, to use traditional language. There's only one city called the Great City in Revelation. We find that in Revelation 11:8. And that's the great city, which is allegorically called Sodom and Egypt. Same thing that Paul called them, where their Lord was crucified. Revelation 11:8. Consequently, the harlot is Jerusalem. The beast appears to be the Roman Empire, with its capital city, Rome, represented by 7 hills. And as I mentioned before, the Vatican is not situated on any of the hills of Rome. But Jerusalem committed much fornication with pagan nations. And we read this going back 600-700 years before this in the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezra, all of them. Jerusalem's priesthood of this day, 70 AD, and its rabbinate, they formed an unholy alliance with the Roman Empire to oppose both zealotry and messianism. And especially the rabbinate, the Pharisaical denomination, were greatly rewarded for this after Jerusalem was destroyed. The Pharisees didn't believe you needed a temple any more than we believe that you needed a temple. They had other ways, other rules they could set up to put a hedge around the Torah, some of which are still in practice today in the rabbinical Judaism. And to me, they're just ridiculous. That's why Yeshua was crucified, and why we see this friction throughout the book of Acts. Always we talk about governors there, we talk about emperors there, we see Paul's in trouble, Peter and Stephen are in trouble with people. All kinds of friction coming to play in Acts. And though the Megawhore is Jerusalem, she's riding on the beast, which is Rome. Both are.
Brother Jackson,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a point. When I was initially doing a study on this a few years ago, I found a list of over like 500 years of various bishops and theologians, and it was in a spreadsheet form and had their name and what year they were lived.
Uh-huh.
It's like at least 500 years, and all of them thought the Pope was the Antichrist, and all of them thought the harlot was Rome. Amazing how misled even back then. They didn't understand.
You have to read carefully, and these people really portrayed what they wanted. The fact is, the Catholic Church certainly has been a beast with its own 248 heads. Like I told you the other day, I think that Pope John Paul I and II, they're certainly working in the kingdom now, but I can't think of any other recently that was. And if you ever have time, you can get smart on that thing with The Godfather Part 3. It's a tremendous movie with terrible reviews because people, unlike you, don't understand what's going on. It's really the story of the assassination of Pope John I. who is a close confidant of Michael Corleone. In fact, Pope John I got Michael Corleone to very piously and emotionally repent of his sins and become a confirmed believer after that, as you'll see in the rest of the movie. It's outstanding movie. You get to see inside the Vatican a lot of stuff and a lot of the sins of the Vatican, especially when it comes to money. Money. Listen,
Godfather 3, you're actually really the Godfather 3 had some truth to it.
it's all true.
Wow.
I think it's all true. I think that, with the exception of some of the characters, of course, are actors, but these people that are in there certainly did exist, especially in Sicily and Corsica and in the rural areas of Italy with murderers and blackmailers and wise people moving to the United States because there's a contract out for them in Sicily. They come here, so they feel safe here, and they begin their fiendish business here. So anyway, I'm no expert at that, but certainly take a look at that if you get a chance. It is just full of stuff. Now we go on to chapter 18. After these things, I saw another messenger coming down out of the sky, having great authority, and the land was enlightened out of its radiance. And it cried out. I consider these messengers to be neuter. They are also called angels. The Greek word is angelos, angeloi, and they are neuter, so I call them it. They're not like Cupid, little cherubs with wings. They are not like the angels that you see in books. These are spiritual bodied entities that were created and work primarily for Yahweh Elohim, with the exception of those who rebelled. And they are, according to Revelation chapter 12, down here on the earth now, at least a good majority of them, if they're not already bound up in a pit someplace. And it cried out in a loud voice, saying, Fallen, fallen, Babylon the Great, and she's become the residence of demons and of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean bird, and the prison of every unclean and hated beast. I would say not only spiritual, but physical as well, because all the outsiders, ethnoi, usually translated nations, I've finally come upon the word that I think is most accurate. Ethnoi, instead of nations, instead of Gentiles, is outsiders. That applies to every case I could think of. All the outsiders have drunk from the wine of the wrath of her illicit sex acts. And the sovereigns of the land have committed sexual perversion with her. And the world travelers have become rich out of the power of her riotous sensuality. That is, her consent and participation in spiritual adultery, which is idolatry, as well as physical fornication. Usually porneia is translated fornication, but what does that mean? I was taught in the Baptist church, higher Sunday school classes. I'm talking about as a teenager, that fornication meant having premarital sex or lusting after somebody. You know, for a 14-year-old, at least for me, that I did, I certainly didn't have any kind of demon of lust. I didn't even know what a girl looked like with no clothes on because we didn't have any in the family. We were all boys. So I didn't understand any of that stuff when some of these fellows in classes would make all kinds of finger actions that meant sexual things. It wasn't until I got much older that I could figure out what they were trying to message each other about. And it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So, in this description, what kind of places attract demons of this kind? What kind of actions attract demons of this kind? What kind of thinking attracts demons of this kind? Sometimes, if I could testify, I just have to say no. That comes into your mind, hey, that's not a sin. It's when you hold it and you work on it and you add to it and you think about it. Just say no or be gone and it will go. It's also implied in the word srenial, which I translate as sensuality, meaning to live in luxury. So it's a riotous sensuality, and also implied that the luxury leads to immorality and improper sensuality. Can also mean to revel, to riot, or to be wanton, to seduce. All these things come under porneia and stranaio. And I heard another voice out of the sky saying, "Get out of her, my people, so that you may not be mixed up in her mark missings and not receive her plagues." Mark missings, hamartia. Usually you have sin there, but that's not what the word means. Hamartia means mark missings. Let's put it down that way. And mark missings, the marks that are missed are, as John tells us in the first letter, not paying attention to the ordinances of Torah. Those are all mark missings. Today in church, the minister in his weekly sermon was talking about the letter of James and about sin and how to avoid sin. This just gives you a little example of the struggle I have listening to this. And I thought, you hypocrite, you haven't kept a Sabbath in your whole life. You won't even hear about it. You haven't kept a food ordinance in your whole life. You eat pig like it's the last thing in the world, like you're starving. Just those two things. What else are you doing? You spend your whole days as a retired man sitting in front of TBN, watching television preachers for your messages, which are about as thin as skin. And I think, how can he speak so diffidently about sin? And he doesn't even know it. Is he accountable? He's not that smart. He's not educated. He comes from out in the country. But I would think after the last 20 years of being a church pastor and being 81 years old, that he would have studied this in one of his quarterlies sometime in that time. And oh, I want to say something. I want to talk to him. But I tried one time and it was without any kind of getting through, getting in that door. I just realized that he's either lost or he's going to take extra grace from the Father. I hope he does get in, but I'm also thinking, what about all these people like that are leading astray? All these people led astray in Christian denominations everywhere. And even back when I was a church pastor, I kept the Sabbath. I always had a Sabbath meeting for anybody who would come. And the final church I had, everybody in the church converted to Sabbath keeping. Unfortunately, when I had to leave there, well, they gave the next a student preacher they put in, they gave her an awful time about this. She didn't know anything about the Bible. And these people, after 4 years of me, they were steeped in the Bible and in Torah. Give back to her even as she's given out.
Brother Jackson, I wanted to ask you a quick
Yeah.
question. It's got nothing to do with the Revelation, but you're speaking about church and stuff like that. I've often thought going back in and like taking a Bible study and being like that undercover spy
Yeah.
and just start bringing up questions to whoever I'm with there and seeing how I would just wonder how fast I'd get thrown out because I got thrown out of my last church 4 years ago. So I wonder how if I was in, but I was in leadership there, so they didn't like the idea of me using Yah and Yahushua and all of that. They didn't want me to do that. So, but anyway, I just often thought about doing that again.
Did you ever meet Commander Lee?
I don't believe so.
Oh, he's here in Vero Beach. He's kind of addled now. You know, he's had strokes and a lot of kidney problems and stuff. He's not anything like he was at one time, a great evangelist. But now that's what he considers his ministry. He goes from meeting to church, practically every hour that he has. And he sits in those meetings. And when he gets an opening by the Holy Spirit, not just because he hears something wrong, he'll speak up about it. And he will use the sacred name, whether they like it or not. They can't throw him out of a Bible study
Mm.
for that, but he's able to do this undercover. Now, I haven't been with him much since he got sick, and I don't go to these meetings with him. I'll just go out of my mind. But he is able to sit through probably 6 or 7 different get-togethers for Bible studies without getting thrown out. That's hard to do. So either he's not saying anything, or he is indeed listening for the Spirit's call to a particular thing. Anyway, if you ever think about doing that, you might want to talk to him because he's been known for doing that since I've known him.
Awesome. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Mark missings, not receive her plagues. For her mark missings are heaped up as high as the sky, and the Elohim has remembered her injustices. I hope so. I hope that Elohim remembers the injustices of this particular government. Give back to her even as she's given out, and pay her back double, twice, according to her works. Now listen to this. For in the cup that she's mixed, mix her a double. That's exactly what it says. Give her a double. If you're having margaritas, if you're drinking pearls, give back the antidote, give her a double. And she'll probably just suck it down and think nothing of it. So used to it. Verse 7. Oh, we're going to get through these 2 chapters. And as much as she has luxuriated and promoted herself, return to her in suffering and anguish. For in her heart, she says, I sit as a female ruler, and I'm never a widow, and a time of mourning I'll never see. Because of this, in a single day, the plagues of her death and misery and famine will arrive, and with fire she'll be burned up. For strong is Yahweh, the Elohim, the one who's judged her. Oh, there's a judgment, all right. And by the way, I use Yahweh for the word Kyrios when it's speaking of the deity. Kyrios is the cover-up word, the gloss in the New Testament for the name, and Kyrios means Lord, and it refers primarily to the emperor. And I think that that's not good. People say, well, there is no Yahweh in the New Testament. Oh, yes, there is. Every time you see Lord, and it's speaking of Elohim, there's a sacred name hidden behind that. When it's speaking of the master, I don't use Lord for then either. I use master because that's a secondary meaning of Kyrios. 9, and the world's sovereigns will weep and wail over her, those having committed illicit sex acts and luxuriating with her, when, standing a long way off, they see the smoke of her burning. Don't forget, both Jerusalem and Rome burned. Rome burned about 65, Jerusalem in 70. On account of the fear of her torment, they're saying, woe, woe, O great city Babylon, O strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. I always thought, is this really Jerusalem? Doesn't the New Testament refer to Babylon as Rome? And now reading this very carefully, it is speaking of Jerusalem as the great whore. Why? I think one of the reasons, as explained last time, is she sits in the middle of the trade route, or at least at that time, between the continents. All trade was done on land, and often you would take a ship to these places. They all had ports. Of course, Jerusalem doesn't have a port because it's not on the Mediterranean, but there were plenty of ports over there, and especially Caesarea on the west coast, where the ships would come in. And if by land, they would take off from there on the trade routes that were designated for them, that were somewhat safe. Israel had hardly become safe for trade routes at this time because of the zealots and the banditos, but the Silk Road came through here, and so did, if you wanted to go to Africa or even India, you pass through this little land bridge, Palestina. That's what the Romans called it. Yeah, somebody told me one time, you got it wrong, brother. That's not Palestine, that's Israel. Well, I'm just using the word that they used in that day for, I think Israel still spoke of a broken up nation, Israel being in parts all over the world. 11, and the world's sellers weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. Just think about the problems in this country with the trucker strikes and slowdowns, and how grocery stores were running out, And a lot of things you just simply couldn't get anymore. Of course, we can get about anything in the world when everything's working right, but listen to the kinds of things that they got in those days through this kind of trade. They didn't buy their cargo any longer because the cargoes were, in 12, of gold and silver and expensive stones and margaritas, and of linen and purple stuff and silk and crimson stuff and all citron wood and all kinds of ivory, all kinds of expensive timber and copper and iron and marble and cinnamon and spices and incenses and myrrh and frankincense and wine and olive oil and the finest flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. However, I don't use the word souls there because in the Roman and Greek time, psyches, soul, didn't mean the same thing as it did in the Hebrew culture. As I've explained many times, in Hebrew, the word's nephesh, and it has to do with the whole human being, body, mind, they're all one. As you sit there, you're one. Of course, these days, we have a great option to be born again of spirit. If you might be a nephesh, you might be a living being. In fact, that's what it says in Genesis, that he became a living being, yet you're not a spiritual being. The only way you can become a spiritual being is to be born of spirit, as it says in John 3. However, most people that are, as Paul says, spiritually dead, they really do have a spirituality as well. Because if they're not born again, something's got to take up that empty place. And that's going to be a demonic entity or a demonic influence. And my friend, if you are born of spirit and you keep your eyes open, sometimes even in the loved ones, you can see when that unclean spirit takes control. You can see it. Faces change, voices change, everything changes. And sometimes ectoplasm comes right out of nose and mouth. You've seen it. 1814. And ripened summer fruit of your inner being's craving has departed from you. Very strange way to say this. Ripened summer fruit. I think probably the traditional translation is just fruit, but there's a difference between green fruit, dry fruit, and the ripened summer fruit, because the summer fruit has something in it that's desirable. That is juice that the other seasons don't have. But this craving has departed from you, and all the fat things and shiny things have departed from you. And no longer, no, never will they find you again. Or as the ISR puts it, and the fruit that your being longed for has gone from you, and all your riches and splendor are lost to you, and you shall find them no more, not at all. So those salesmen in verse 15 who became rich from her, they stand far off, weeping and wailing due to the fear of her torment. And they say, woe, woe, the great city, the megapolis, the one garbed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold gilding and precious stone and margaritas, for in but an hour this great wealth has been brought to ruin. Now it just comes to my mind 9/11, watching that on TV. I just preached a revival in Georgia that night before that. I said, something is going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's going to happen now. And then to wake up, I was staying with another preacher, and he said, you said something's going to happen, and it did happen. Get out here and look at this. Wow. In but an hour. And every sea captain and all those sailing from place to place, and sailors and those who trade by the sea, they stood a long way off too. And seeing the smoke of her burning, they cried out, saying, what's comparable to the great city? Here we're talking about Jerusalem. 19. And they cast dust over their heads and cried out, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city, the megapolis, through whom all those owning ships in the sea became rich through her wealth. How is it that in 1 hour she's laid waste? Oh, you sky, rejoice over her. Also, you pious and apostles and prophets. Elohim judge this judgment for you and against her. And one powerful messenger lifted up a stone similar to a gigantic millstone and cast it out into the sea, saying, with such violence will Babylon, that great city, be cast down, and no, she'll not be found anymore. And for many years, of course, there was no Jerusalem there. After which emperor starts with TH, changed the name of the city to Aelius Capitolina, very short time after the Jewish War. And there it was Aelius Capitolina for centuries and centuries, which was Aelius is the name, first name of the emperor. Why can't I think of it right now? Oh, well, first name of the emperor, and Capitolina is a way of saying Jupiter. Capitolina, Jupiter. So the whole city was turned over to the god Jupiter. And then at this time, I put into the commentary here what I read last week about what happened, I think, yeah, in the sea. Remember? The Romans drowned all these people and went out to these boats and shot darts at people and bled them out to death. And that the blood came up to a person's shoulders. That doesn't mean that I always thought, well, it's like a river of blood. Where can you get that much blood? But what it means is it's splashed all over the place, rather than they're in a river of blood. But the rivers became full of dead bodies, he says, and not one of those Israelites, those Judeans, those people that lived in Palestina who were on the sea escaped. And not only that, but the people on land got to enjoy, as Josephus says, a terrible stink. And a very sad sight there was on the following days over the country. For as for the shores, they were full of shipwrecks, and dead bodies all swelled up. And as the dead bodies were inflamed by the sun and putrefied, they corrupted everything. 22. And the sound of kitharists and musicians and flautists and trumpeters, they won't be heard in you, nor will artisans of any type be found in you anymore, nor the sound of a millstone be heard in you anymore. Well, a kitharist is, kithara is a instrument with 4 to 7 strings, looks kind of like a harp. But this word artisan is important in here. No more artisans of any type. And the word here used is technetes. Sometimes it's used techne, speaking of an artisan. Now, this word is used by the KJV and some traditional Bibles to mean carpenter, as Yeshua's and Yosef's profession. This word doesn't mean carpenter. It doesn't mean anything like carpenter necessarily. A woodworker, I'm talking about one that scrolls wood or makes, I see them turning wood a lot on YouTube, wood turning YouTube videos. That's the kind of a woodworker that would be an artisan. But technon, or tectone, sorry, we get the word technology. It includes any number of different skills, not just a carpenter, not even a carpenter. And a millstone indicates the end of industry. If they don't hear a millstone anymore, what he's saying is that's the end of anything you might consider a factory or any kind of industry, and no artisans, artists, writers, scribes, etc., etc. Now, in calling Yeshua a carpenter, I'm thinking, since there's nothing can be known about his childhood, and I believe that he was off. He was away from Nazareth because they hated him here. He was a mamzer, a person of ill repute, a bastard. Everybody knew it, as we read in Luke 4, that he was off apprenticing, maybe with his older brother, Jude, maybe with his father, Yosef, and it could very well be that he was maybe a cutter of stone, because right up the road is Sepphoris, the capital of Galilee, never mentioned in the New Testament, but it's like 3 miles away. And Nazareth was a bedroom community for the workers in that city. And here they would come every morning, walking, 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 and the sights would become less and less Jewish as you got closer and closer to Sepphoris. And he may have worked there. It says he was a tecton. Did I say tecton? I get that mixed up with technon. That's a little child. No, tectone. What did he do in that apprenticeship? Well, it could be scroll work. You know, he talks a lot about woodwork and building things. He could have been an apprentice in a garden or a farmer, something like that. Certainly he was. He was known also as a shepherd. Talks a lot about that, but we really don't know. We need some more clues.
Jackson.
Yes.
He was also evidence that he went with his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a tin merchant for the Roman Empire. So that would answer a lot of questions about him seeing the world. A lot of the, what do you call it? The rumors that he went to India, and even to Joseph Smith that he went to New York. So that tecton, that the Joseph of Arimathea would have gone all over the world looking for tin for the Roman Empire. And if he took Yeshua with him, that would answer a lot of those rumors that he was in those places.
I think that is a real good idea. I think it's quite possible, maybe even the most possible things. There are so many rumors about him going someplace, and that Joseph of Arimathea, as you know, I personally believe that is his father or his erstwhile father, because here he ends up with the rest of his family in that tomb. Well, if Joseph of Arimathea doesn't exist anyway, just let a bunch of people into his tomb. He's in there too, by the way. That's the Telpiot tomb. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't part of his family. So yeah, maybe an uncle, maybe the Joseph that's supposed to be the father, but it's because it's obvious that they keep the Joseph, the father, hidden. They won't say anything about him, and they make like this Yosef Ari Matya, which I believe is his real name. They make him somebody outside of the family, like he's just a friend that came in there at the end of Yeshua's life. So yeah, I think that's very intriguing, very much so. Thank you. And in her the blood of prophets and saints, even that of all the slain in the world, was discovered. Oh, that's the end of 18. And you know what? Pretty soon we'll be getting the good news. It's coming up in 20, but the 3 chapters, 17, 18, and 19, are very, very important. And so we'll take this up next week. Let's see, we ought to have 3 more sessions and then we should be about done. Thank you for being faithful. I thought probably there wouldn't be anybody left by this time, but you're the faithful few. Thank you for being here. Anybody have a comment or any questions?
After we're done, let's do it again.
Maybe we do something else. Okay, brothers. By the way, first of the week, I'm going to be making that appointment with Adam Marshak, the preterist expert, and he really is. He really is. And so I'll be letting you know maybe on the Friday. If he is available on Friday afternoon, that's when we'll probably do it.
I got a lot of questions for him.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you and see you soon.